This is just a high-level introduction to Flutter, what Flutter is, and all the cool stuff and magical promises it offers. So who am I? I'm a Google developer expert. I'm also a CTO at Zoom.ai. Super unrelated to Flutter. Zoom.ai is some AI company that we do automated assistance for large enterprises and stuff. So I'm not going to bore you with myself. You can hear me for another 30 minutes. So the story, where did Flutter come from? Yeah, I think it was October 27th, 2016, I want to say. And I was in Munich. We were at a Dart conference. And the Dart conference, and Dart was very, very young. Not many people knew it. If you said you used Dart, people said, huh? You play darts? And so it was kind of a weird language at that time. But I really enjoyed Dart. And I was already talking about Dart. I spoke at the first Dart Summit. And so they invited me to speak here again about Angular Dart. And what had happened on the second day, October 27th, was I was sitting on the front row, and I have a photo from it. I'll show you guys. It's like a very cool birthplace of Flutter photo. And Eric Seidel came on stage. And Eric is this super, super smart guy. He comes on stage and he says, they have something cool that they're working on. And what they were working on is this thing called Sky. And I was wondering what Sky was. And at first, I saw on the paper that Sky was going to be announced. And at that time, I was like, oh, Sky is going to be this really, really cool project to bring Dart to Android. Because at that time, everyone in the Dart community wanted Dart to come to Android. And Kotlin came eventually, which is whatever, great language. But so when he got on stage, he started talking about, here is Sky. And he showed a little, I think it was like a box spinning, and he showed a calculator app and a weather app. And it just looked like an iOS or Android app. He had both phones running. And I said, OK, Dart is dead. I think they're going towards WebView stuff like Cordova and all the insanity that was a phone gap. And anyone done phone gap here before? Yes, right? Going deep into that DOM tree to improve your performance on some Android phone, that was ridiculous. So I thought Dart was going in that direction. But it looked fluid and it looked smooth. So I was curious to see how they're actually using Dart to build mobile apps. And what Eric started to say was, a couple of years ago, or even probably a year ago, before October, the conference, they had an initiative at Google that they wanted to figure out how to build mobile apps faster. And one of their big problems was they had an internal app where it's a big CRM app. Imagine Google's CRM app, right? They're not using Salesforce. They're using their own CRM. And they had a CRM app that they always worked on. But whenever they added features on the Android, they had to get an iOS team to build that feature. And anyone who's working on a development team, you have your own backlog, sprint, plugs, blah, blah, blah. Developers getting lazy and saying this can't be done on iOS or Android. And so you have all that happening. And so Google said, we need to move faster. This is affecting our velocity. We need to come up with something interesting. And I think around that time, React was coming out too. So obviously, they were inspired for sure to say, OK, how can we make this cross-platform? So what Google did was they built a big internal matrix, probably using Google Spreadsheets. And what they did was, OK, we have a bunch of languages being used at Google. They had Python, Go, Java, Kotlin, Dart, C, C++, whatever. And they have a bunch of frameworks at Google, Angular, the Dart framework for the web, and all this stuff. So how can we use this to build a mobile app that's good? So they started going through each one. They said Python, let's see how we can use Python to build mobile apps. And they stumbled on this language that a very useful team at Google was using, the AdWords team, basically that pays Google everything that makes all their money, and it was Dart. And they were using Dart for Angular Dart, and they were loving Dart because they said it made them more productive, there was less bugs, but they were using it for the web. So they started saying, OK, Dart is an interesting language. We like what you guys are doing. We understand your pros and cons of the language. So how do we bring this to mobile? During that time, Eric Seidel got involved, I believe. And he was, I think, project manager on Chrome or product manager. And what they did was they said, look, we have a great rendering engine right now, which is Chrome. we're not talking about WebKit here. We're talking about the actual rendering that draws all the pixels, right? And so it's this native Skia layer or whatever. I'm not too familiar with rendering engines. And they said, we have this. Let's strip out the HTML layer. Let's strip out the JavaScript V8 engine. Let's strip out CSS, DOM, all that stuff. Let's take that rendering engine and let's write some Dart code that draws some shapes on this rendering engine. Because your rendering engine is fast enough, you could play games on the web, you can watch videos, everything in 60 frames per second, even faster. And so they know the rendering engine is world class. And Chrome works absolutely everywhere. If it works on desktop, it works on mobile with very little battery life consumption. So they've optimized this for a long, long time. So all they need to do is draw shapes, right? At the end of the day, that's what any mobile app is. It's just drawing something to the screen. So they took Dart and they started working with it. And that's where Sky came from, and Sky was the internal code name. If you guys pay attention, at the end of the talk, ask me where the name Flutter comes from, and I'll tell you. And so they started working on this. And then Eric Seidel at Munich announced that we're working on this mobile initiative. At first, Sky was very, very crappy. It was worked very slow. It crashed all the time, but it had a lot of potential because whatever mobile app, whatever thing you did on Android, it looked identical on iOS. The performance was identical. If I made a change on my Android app, it looked exactly the same on my iOS app, right? And that was very, very key for me as a developer, coming from Android and then trying to learn iOS and building some iOS apps at Kobo and building Android apps. It was just like, okay, this is just a waste of my time. I'm building the same thing. And as an entrepreneur, as a single developer, I'm just building one app, then I'm like, okay, got to do the whole thing again on the other app, and it's just a waste of time. And so that's where the story of Flutter comes from. And so the three main things that I wanted to take away from that is because of using the rendering engine in Chrome, Flutter offers you 60 frames per second on native Android and iOS. It's native. Right? This isn't like PhoneGap or any other craziness. This is actually compiled code that takes Dart code, compiles it down into bytecode that runs on your phone. Right? This is not a web view. And early there was a lot of misconception around it being a web view because they kept talking about this Chrome rendering engine they were using, but it's not a web view. It's just this rendering engine that they took. So the best way to think about Flutter is Unity for mobile apps, right? Has anyone done any Unity game development here? Right? So when you do a mobile app for Unity, it's going to work on Android, iOS, PS, Xbox, whatever, with slight modifications. Flutter, you can get away with that. You don't have to make too many modifications, if any. And then the last point is actually 3 pillars of Flutter. It's fast, it's beautiful, and natural. Let me see, do I talk about it? No, okay. So what they mean by fast is 60 frames per second. It needs to move fast. It needs to work properly, just like a mobile app. The last thing you want is jank and all sorts of weirdness happening in your mobile app. Because the user will go to the Play Store, say, 1 star, your app gave me a virus. It needs to be beautiful, right? Sure, it's drawing shapes, but users don't want shapes. Users want your app to look and behave smoothly. So Google was in a good position because they just came out with material design with Lollipop or whatever, and they said, great, we're going to get the Flutter team and the material design team to sit together. And so when I went to San Francisco, or Mountain View, their office, they were actually sitting beside each other, and whenever the Flutter team came up with widgets, components in the app, the material design team made sure that they were perfect to spec. In fact, it was so cool that they had these massive TVs on the screen, and whenever they pushed the commit, a ran UI test on all the widgets to make sure that they conform to the material design UI spec, right? So they were thinking about this very, very, very carefully. They wanted to make sure that it looks beautiful. And then lastly is the most important one of all. It's even more important, in my opinion, than fast. Because fast, the user can blame his crappy phone. But natural, the Flutter app is natural. And what I mean is, on Android, it feels and behaves like an Android app. And on iOS, it feels and behaves like an iOS app. And what I mean by that is, on iOS, people are used to certain patterns. As they're scrolling a list, they expect the list to do a bounce, right? As they're if they swipe their finger from left to right, they expect the view controller to slide away. Right? On Android, you just don't expect that behavior. In Android, if you scroll a list, you see like a weird blue glow at the bottom. You expect the back button and all sorts of other navigation patterns. So natural is important. You want your apps to feel like a user doesn't want to open up your app and go, huh, this feels like an iOS app, or this doesn't feel like an iOS app. This feels like an Android app. And so what Flutter does is all the components inherently understand which platform they're running on and behave accordingly. So you never have to say, hey, Flutter, I'm running on iOS, so behave like an iOS app. It'll just do its job, right? There's interesting flags where you can say, hey, force yourself to be an Android app, and that's just really for demos. No one really does it. I mean, I don't see any use case why you want to emulate an iOS app on Android. And so natural is all about that. So let's take a demo. I'm going to just do a quick I don't know, live code, whatever. So basically, you can use Flutter. I'm going to change the resolution, so it's not for ants. Oh, no, not mirror displays. Display scale 720. All right, can everyone see this? Cool. All right, nice, 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 if there's something to see. Okay, so new project. Flutter is just a plugin. You can plug it into Android Studio. You can plug it into IntelliJ, VS Code, Sublime. If you're crazy, 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 you can do it in Vim. One of my friends who works at Zoom does it in Vim. I'm like, I don't understand what you're doing. His battery life lasts so long because all he has is a black screen open the whole time. So regardless, you can still do that there. So you go and file new project. Just like anything, you choose Flutter, you choose where your SDK is. And if you've done mobile development before, regardless if it's iOS or Android, even web mobile development like Cordova and stuff, this is going to be very familiar. All this is saying is, hey, what's your project name? What's the location of your project? And then it's asking you for your organization, which on Android ends up becoming the package name. On iOS becomes the organization name or something. I forget what it's called. And so, again, it's this unique identifier, globally unique, so that's how your apps update and everything. So you can call it whatever. And then there's a specific question that it asks you, Android language. Do you want to use Java, Kotlin, Objective-C, or Swift? But you're asking me, well, I'm writing it in Dart. Why do I need to know these things? Technically, you don't. You can choose whatever you want here. This is really for if you want to do native development. Like, say Samsung tomorrow comes out with a crazy new sensor that's like nose unlock. Right? Flutter's not going to build a nose unlock into their Flutter thing. They're just going to be like, whatever, we're not going to spend time on that. However, you as a developer really think nose unlock is the future. And so you say, OK, I'm going to build a plugin for nose unlock. And so you can say Kotlin and write your Kotlin plugin that binds to Samsung devices. And then you can expose that in Dart. And we'll get to that at the very end. But you can choose whatever. I usually keep the defaults. Then I click Finish. And what it does is it creates a project here. I'm going to hide away all this stuff. And just a simple project. So what I'm going to do is run it. I'm going to run it on the iPhone simulator, only because it'll probably be faster. But what you can do is you can plug in your Android phone or the Android emulator, and it'll work fine. Flutter does not discriminate. It's very liberal. OK, so I'm going to bring this down here. OK, so here's my simple Flutter app. Oh, how do I move this? OK, here's my simple Flutter app, right? And what I can do with this is I can press this button, and it will change the count of the number. That's awesome. That's great. This is working. And if you actually deploy it on your phone, you'll see that it feels just like an Android app or an iOS app. It actually even understands the stupid notch thing that's happening these days. It knows to expand your navigation bar. It understands everything, so you don't have to worry about that, right? The Flutter team has done a lot of good work to building that. Now, this is where, as a developer, Flutter gets very interesting. So, number one, Flutter has this feature called Hot Reload. And what Hot Reload is as I'm developing, it's like developing a web app, right? You can have your browser open on the side, and you can have some like JavaScript grunt plugin or something that's automatically refreshing your page. And as you type your elements, your page design loads. This is a game changer for mobile development, right? So what I can do here is I can say, okay, I'm gonna make this right here. So instead of calling it Flutter demo homepage, I'm gonna call this hello DevFest Florida. And I'm gonna save it. And as you can see at the top, the thing changed, right? And now say you're doing this at work and your designer comes up to you and your designer's like, hey, our company color's not blue, it's red. You're like, oh, okay, fine. So now in typical scenarios, you would be like, okay, hold on. You're gonna go change the color to red, wait for it to build and deploy it, and then it would build, and then say, whatever, you're not logged in, you're gonna have to log in again, all sorts of craziness. Let's ignore all that. We're gonna go here, we're gonna change the entire theme of the app here. I'm gonna say, okay, colors is red. I'm gonna save it, and it's changed the entire app to red. So this is cool. I'm just changing little properties. Why not? Let's just start adding widgets here, right? So see where it says you have pushed this button many times? I'm gonna first make that font size big. So I'm gonna change style equals text style, font size. I'm gonna make that 30. Oh, whoops, sorry. That's the counter, my bad. Let's take that. Let's undo that. So that's cool. So I made a mistake, I'm just gonna undo it. This is great because I've done this many times on Android and I'm like, crap, I shouldn't have done that. Anyways, boom, right? So you saw that I made a mistake, I went back, I fixed that mistake, I pasted it into the other view without reloading the app, without wasting time. It's just like doing web development, right? Which is extremely fast. Now I'm gonna make it, okay, that's too big. I'm gonna click 15. That's fine, that's great, whatever, 18. Look at that. I'm just iterating here at a very, very fast pace. Okay, so forget how that looks. I'm gonna copy this. Let's add a new widget here, right? I'm gonna say Mickey Mouse. Whatever. I do not pre-script this. I'm just like improvising this as I go. It says Mickey Mouse there, right? Great. I'm gonna increase that font size to 24. Awesome. So all this is well and good. You can see you can just keep developing over and over and over again without ever having to, stop. There's some caveats. If you make like massive changes to your whole app and add, go crazy, then sometimes it'll be like, hey, reload the app. So now reload the app. How long does that take? I'm gonna hit this reload button, and then there, my app is reloaded, right? So even if I screw up, I just have to hit a button, and you can see the state went away, right? Here, I'm gonna reload the app again, and the 6 is gonna be 0 because it cleaned out everything, it rebuilt the entire UI. So if I really screw up in hot reload, I just have to it's called hot updates, and I just restart the whole app. Hot restart, that's what it's called. Okay, so now let's go to the increment counter. Whenever I press this button, the count's going up by 1. What you notice is as I was developing, the count stayed the same. Only when I did a restart of the app did the count change. So what's neat is Flutter keeps those instance variables in memory, right? As you're developing, those variables stay. So imagine you're building an API and you're making OAuth, for example, which is the bane of everyone's existence. And you're doing some OAuth development here, and your bearer token does not work properly, right? You're like, oh my God, I just sent the null, right? Or I sent the wrong API key. You would normally restart your app, do the whole process again. Here, what you have to do is just change that variable, hit save, it auto reloads, and just hit that button again, right? And so you can do iterative development really, really fast here. So here, as I press a button, it changes it to 1. Let's change the actual algorithm. We were doing UI component. Let's just not touch UI. Let's change the actual algorithm. I'm going to go counter equals counter times 2. I'm going to hit save. Now, every time I hit the plus button, it's going to multiply it by 2. Right? The actual implementation has changed here. Right? I can change this to now make, I don't know, counter times 3, 4, do a whole other API call maybe in there, do a database call, do whatever, but everything stays the same and it's in hot reload mode, really, really fast. Now, hot reload is actually crazy, and this is a stunt that I do. A while ago, my friend, whom I got into Flutter development, they probably hate me because I'm like, use Flutter. So I got him into Flutter development. Yes, this is a great extension called Tabby Cat. So I got him into Flutter development, and he asked a question. He's an Android developer, and he said, hey, what is the alternative to a relative layout in Flutter? The great thing about Flutter, it's kind of it's actually amazing, is that when you ask questions on Stack Overflow, the Flutter team actually responds, but not in like a one-word response. This is how they respond, okay? So alternative to relative layout Flutter. Equivalent, okay. Not alternative, yeah, okay. So my friend Tofik says, hey, is there a way to implement this similar to what relative layout does in Flutter, on Android? It doesn't matter if you don't know Android, it's just he wanted a certain layout. So this was his little app, and he said, hey, I want to build this. I use a relative layout for this. How do I do this? So you have, hold on. You have this person named Colin Jackson. Colin responds and says, hey, Flutter layouts are like this, blah, blah, blah. He talks about to answer a specific question. And then this crazy guy goes, hold on, I built the whole thing for you. And he builds the entire UI for him. And this is not just like one question. The Flutter team goes out of the way because they want to educate and show you how easy it is, right? So Tofik's answer was solved in a very, very amazing way where he got Google to work for him. So he responded with this. Now, I'm going to show you something very interesting about hot reload. I'm going to copy this entire code base. Okay, I'm going to go back to IntelliJ. All right, so again, this is my app. It's working, right? I'm going to paste this entire code here. Now, hopefully this works. I'm going to hit save, and what's going to happen is the entire app's going to change into a totally different app. This is a Flutter magic trick. So I'm going to hit save. Here we go. Excellent, right? Image is even loaded because he added a new component in it that does dynamic loading of images, right? So the way the Flutter's hot reload system is, this is how flexible it is, right? So as you're developing, you can change your entire app while you're developing, and things will work. Then I hit Command Z, hit save. Here we go. No. Oh, it says lost connection to device. This is not a Flutter issue. Oh no. Okay, something happened. But anyways. The stunt worked. I hope you're all impressed at how cool hot reload is. So you can do lots of interesting stuff with hot reload. And what that enables you to do is faster development. And without getting into the nuances of the language and stuff, Dart, honestly, is the easiest language to learn. If you know Java, if you know JavaScript, if you know TypeScript, you already know Dart, right? Like, Dart is super boring. There's nothing like, it's not like Ruby where you're like, oh, wow. You know, all the sugar syntax. You can get all that sugar syntax in Dart, but to just get started with Dart, you don't need to know all this. It just works. It's like programming 101. It's the most simplest language ever. So I think as a developer getting into mobile development or just trying to try Flutter out, you already know the language. There's not a big thing. What you have to learn is some of the concepts around how RX works and how reactive development works. But Flutter, the Stack Overflow's there, the documentation is really good, so it's really fairly easy to learn. I think for most people, they can learn it within a couple weeks, even less, and it's a good investment to make. So moving forward, after my crazy stunts, all right, full screen, okay, what the hell? I do not know how to use PowerPoint, apparently. View. Oh, present. Ah, that's why. So stupid. OK. So we did demo Hello World, which turned out to be like hello craziness. So this is in general, just a super high-level architecture, how Flutter is. You got your material components. And now you might be asking me, well, iOS people don't like material design. Yeah, OK, look at Evernote and New York Times. But forget about those. If you really want to use the Cupertino-style components, this graph isn't updated, but where material lies, so does Cupertino. So if you want your app to specifically have a very distinct iOS look, because material design is not a distinct Android look, it's a distinct look for the web, mobile in general. But if you just want the iOS experience, you can use Cupertino components. And then you have underlying this layer called widgets. And widgets are what power everything. So widgets are the act. Say there's a list view call a widget. I mean, let's say there's a button called widget, a button call a widget, that's a button. And then you have a material button, right? Then you have a Cupertino button, right? So it's just extensions of these objects. And then you have the rendering layer. You have animations. The animation framework is very powerful. You got painting. You have gestures, services. So services are what end up tying to the native device. So if you want to use GPS, if you want to use, you know, some vibration or whatever, you can tie into the service. And what a service is, at a very abstract high level, is just a message broadcast where you say, hey, Android, can you vibrate my phone? Oh, no, it says, hey, hey, platform, can you vibrate my phone? If it's running on Android, it receives the message bus, and it says, OK, I'm going to vibrate this phone, right? Because Google has those libraries already written. Same thing on iOS. So it'll just deal with that without you having to write code. And then the stuff that most people don't care about, at the bottom, they have the rendering engine, the Dart VM, Mojo, which is their internal object or objects framework, so whatever. So to recap that, why Flutter? It's a tightly integrated development environment. It's one code base targeting both platforms. So when you fix bugs, when you add features to one platform, you're getting it on the other platform, right? There's very little times where you'll be like, that doesn't really make sense on iOS. It'll just work. And then easy to talk to native platforms if needed. Now, this slide is actually a bit old. When I say one code base targeting both platforms, as of today, it still holds. Flutter Live was a marketing conference where Google said, hey, look at all these cool guys using Flutter. They had Square, they had Alibaba. Alibaba has like 40 million users on Flutter right now. And they said, we're also announcing something very interesting. We're announcing a project. So just like they did with Sky, Eric Seidel got on stage and he said, hey, I got something interesting we're working on again. It's called Hummingbird. And what is Hummingbird, you ask me? Hummingbird is a way to, I thought she was going to answer what Hummingbird is. Hummingbird is a way to run Flutter apps on the desktop. Why? Because you have the rendering engine from Chrome. It just makes sense to bring that back to desktop. I asked the product manager, who is now the product manager of Fuchsia, when is Flutter coming to desktop? And this was 2 years ago. And he told me the biggest problem with desktop right now is accessibility. So believe it or not, the big thing that's holding them back, among other technical challenges, I'm sure, but the thing is, on mobile, you don't have to deal with pressing tab and switching between all the inputs and stuff, right? You don't have to deal with screen readers, reading the HTML elements and stuff. On mobile, there's a good framework for it. And so that's a really big thing that was holding them back. And I think they've solved that, or at least solving it, which is why they were able to make this announcement. So that's very cool. They had a demo of a game that was running, a game and an app that was running on mobile, then they had it running on Chrome, Safari, and stuff. So that's very, very cool. And so in the near future, that is possible. Then you have this crazy idea of Fuchsia that everyone talks about once in a while, where Google is building a new mobile OS that could replace Android. Pardon? Fuchsia, yeah. So maybe, and what's interesting about Fuchsia is it actually, the entire operating system's UI layer as well as the apps are written in Flutter. So that's pretty cool and exciting. All right, so if you're an Android developer, you can go to, yes? I don't work for Google, so I don't know the answer to that. The only thing that I know, I probably know just a tiny bit more, and I'll share that now so everyone knows, is that when I talked to the product manager on Fuchsia, he was telling me that, listen, they're experimenting with a lot of stuff. Obviously, he's not going to tell me anything NDA, but he said they are trying to see what concepts they can build, because now they've learned a lot about mobile operating systems. When Android was built, it was like, crap, iOS is there, we got to build something, right? Now it's like, okay, we've learned how mobile phones are. Mobile phones are really plateauing smartphones. You know, they all look the same anyway. So we understand how a mobile device works, what use cases people have for mobile device. So Fuchsia is really built around that concept. If you ask me, I think what's going to happen is Android and Fuchsia are just going to blend in the long run. Android's not going away. It's too much of an investment. They're not going to be like, well, sucks to be you, time to be a Fuchsia developer. Not happening anytime soon. But I think it's going to be a lot like Windows, right? If you look at Windows 95 and look at Windows 10 now, a vastly different operating system, right? Whole new design language, whole new development environment. So I think as a gradual change, that's what's going to happen. That's my opinion. And that's all I know. If you're an iOS developer, again, if you just go to flutter.io/docs/get started, there's tons of docs, right? Even for web developers, there's a doc there. So these docs are interesting. I wrote the Android one. Another great engineer wrote iOS, and I think Google wrote the web developer one. And there's a lot of components for Flutter that exist. And as you start diving into Flutter, you'll know about this library web page called Pub. And Pub has Flutter and Dart components. So, for example, if your app is looking for a GPS, you can type in GPS, and here, there's a geolocation plugin for Flutter, right? So you can just go drop that in your Flutter app and use GPS now. And you know that this works on iOS and Android. You don't have to worry about different implementations. If you want to use push notifications, it's there. Firebase, OneSignal, Firebase messaging. It's all there for you, right? Yes? So, yes. So all Flutter is essentially a Flutter view running and a NS Flutter view if you're from the iOS world, right? Or whatever. And so yeah, it is possible. There is documentation on it. That documentation is early. But what you can do is you can have an existing Android app and bring a Flutter view into it by doing some configuration. And now when a user navigates to that app, it's the Flutter app that loads up. So that's great if you want to try to bring it into your company and talk about it and slowly have Flutter take over. So that's cool. Any other component you can drop it in? Yes? Right now, I think some of the limitations are going away. There was a Webview limitation. There's a talk that's happening soon that's going to talk about how to implement Webview into your Flutter app. That was a big challenge that they had to get around. I think the really, really big limitation is if you're building an app that you expect to work on all the phones in the world in developing nations, right? Because those phones are low-powered phones, and Android One and all those frameworks are really designed to run on low-powered devices. Flutter has a requirement of, I think, Lollipop or something. So it's very good for most devices, but for emerging markets and stuff, I don't think Flutter is the right tool for it. You want to be very optimized. I think maybe for the right tool for emerging markets is something like mobile web, right, with service workers and stuff, just carrying the Chrome platform. So other than that, I don't see too many limitations. The limitation is more learning a new language, which is Flutter, which is Dart, which is fairly simple. The other thing is if you're used to frameworks like Realm as a database, I think there's a Realm talk here. I saw their sticker outside. It doesn't have support right now for Flutter, right? So if some of these tools that you're using a lot and you want to use for Flutter, they might not exist. However, if you go to Pub, you'll see that the number of packages is going up at a dramatic rate. Like if this was a startup, VCs would be throwing money at it because it's just, it's just a hockey curve because so many people are saying, well, all I have to do is expose the message bus and I can integrate my plugin. So that's what's happening. I don't think there's too many limitations as of now. And mainly because Flutter is 1.0 now. It's stable. It's not a beta anymore. So you can actually use it in production apps. Yes?
How's the performance as compared to the native apps? Now we looked at the apps, but those are like,
Okay. This is great. So this is awesome because it goes into my next little demo called Reflectly. So Reflectly, I'm going to plug it in on my phone, but the phone is going to use Visor, which is going to have some lag on here. So I recommend everyone download this app. It is not my app. I wish I did. I wish I did make it. It's on iOS also. Hold on. My mom's messaging me. My God. Okay. She's like, hey, when's your talk? Okay, so Reflectly is a Flutter app, right? You can download it on Android. You can download thing. Now, it's a subscription app, so just sign up for a free trial, then cancel it. Every time I do this talk, I'm probably like, wow, look at these numbers increase. Oh, what's happening? Why are people canceling? I'm screwing up their VC numbers. Regardless, here, yeah, okay, sure. All right, so I'm going to open up Reflectly here. There's two reasons why I want to show Reflectly. A, the performance is amazing. And B, it does not look like a material design app, right? Flutter apps do not have to look like material design. Flutter is just widgets. You can design them and skin them however you want. So here's Reflectly app. If you, look at that, okay. So it's not as smooth on here because of the lag, but if you install on your phone, you can see it on real time that there is absolutely zero lag. It's 60 frames per second performant, right? So you're not going to run into performance issues. And you can see the UI. So I'm going to say hi, Reflectly. Beautiful. Nice to meet you. What do your friends call you? They call me Faisal. All right. Hey, Faisal. Okay. Oh, I've set up so many accounts on here. It's like spam. Faisal, Abid, plus 1, 2, 3. They're like, wow, so many Faisals on our system. All right, please don't hack this account. Oh my God. Good validation though. Oh my God. All right, there we go. Right? Yep, 7-day trial. So in-app purchase billing built into it, right? So this is another thing. It has in-app purchase built in. Flutter, there's a plugin for it. There's actually 2 big plugins, and there's, I mean, I don't know if I should say it, but I think there's going to be an official Google plugin coming soon because they did reach out to me and say, hey, are you interested in building one? Then they never got back, so I assume the interest is not happening or they found someone else. But it's going to happen. So I'm going to subscribe to this. It's a trial, whatever. I'll do it. I'll take a bullet for you guys. So it's going to process. And as you can see, this is native Android now popping up. This is the Play Store. This isn't something that Flutter implemented. Great. Loading. Nice. OK. So which theme do you, which is what? Themes phase. Oh, OK. So again, this is a nice component that they implemented in Flutter. And if you play around with this, if you do subscribe to the trial, you can see that, wow, look at that animation. Wow, that's beautiful. That's lovely. I love that. So last small thing, do you want to send you small reminders? Push notifications. You can do it in Flutter, right? There's very little limitations that you're like, oh, crap, I can't do that. So yes, please, annoy me. Let's get started. So now you have a very nice app here. You can add today's story. Good afternoon, yeah. Okay, how was your day today? It's great. So if you just, this is a very nice app. And if you have done mobile development, if you've done Android development, iOS development, web development, you know that a lot of this stuff is complicated to do. A lot of this stuff, you got to get the performance right. And I'm sure it's just the performance angle, you know, if you start loading this up with a million widgets, it's going to run slow. So you still have to think like a sane developer. Flutter's not going to solve all problems for you. But as long as you code it right, you're going to get this equal performance. You're going to get the nice designs. And you don't have any limitations even in terms of UI. This is a very distinct looking app that they said, hey, we're not going to follow material design. We're not following Cupertino. We're going to design our own component set, right? And so it's very easy to do in Flutter. It's just taking a button and adding styles to it. So as a long-winded answer, that is a bit of your answer. You can install it and play it on your device. Oh, nice. I didn't know I could control it from here. It's very cool. Cool. So with that, this is Q&A time, which we've already been doing. Thanks for breaking rules. No, I'm joking. So if anyone has any other questions, speak now. Forever hold your silence. Yes? Not yet. It's happening. So this is actually very interesting. Did you read the Reddit thread on this or something? No. Oh, okay. So there was a Reddit thread on this like 2 days ago. And someone asked this. They said, how do I remove semicolons? I don't know why you don't want to. I love semicolons. Like, what the hell? But anyway, let's get into a war here. No, semicolons, they're talking about it. One of the issues is the way the language is designed. Semicolons can cause a lot of vagueness onto exactly what you're trying to do. And let's see if I can find that Reddit thread. Our Flutter dev. Look at that, innocent chalupa or whatever. Okay, semicolon. I don't know where it is. But anyways, he had a lot of good examples. The Dart engineer chimed in, and he said, okay, here's some examples about this. This is why it's very hard to do. So soon, they're working on it. There's actually a big GitHub issue on it, and I think they're going to do it. There was even a survey sent out the other day that said, hey, do you want to remove semicolons? I obviously said no, but I'm sure a lot of people said yes. Cool. Any other questions? Yes? Yes. I don't know why you want to say that. Okay. So there's a fundamental design difference in React Native and Flutter. React Native, when you write your components in React Native tells Android and tells iOS, hey guys, here's a button that this developer wants. Can you generate a button? So it says, okay, I'm going to generate an Android native button. So it's going to go android.view.button or ns button on iOS. On Flutter, it's drawing the whole thing on its own, right? So it's like Unity. It's drawing its own, it has its own viewport, and it draws all the components there. So there's a pro and a con there. The con for Flutter is that if tomorrow Apple says, we're now going to come out with a crazy new design language that we require every single app to follow, otherwise you're not approved, Flutter team's going to have to like pull all-nighters and lots of Red Bull to come up with, to design this to work for a thing. React Native, as a developer, you'll be like, great, my app's just going to work. I just have to recompile it. I don't have to recompile, it'll just work, right? But that's very unlikely to happen, and you shouldn't not use the technology just because of that stupid use case. So that is the big difference. Performance-wise, the VM rendering engine on Flutter is designed and is constantly tested on a bunch of phones, obviously. And so it says, great, as a button, I want this button to always work 60 frames per second on this device. React Native is leaving it up to the OS, leaving it up to Android. So whatever manufacturer has their own implementation of a button, that's how it's going to look, unless you do a lot of custom styling. And even then, you run into issues where sometimes React Native you won't be able to customize that button because Samsung, usually it's Samsung, they're crazy phones, they're adding some explicit padding, they're adding some explicit rounded edges that you can't get in touch with in React Native. So that's really the big difference. And that's where companies usually get burned, where they build a React Native app on iOS, it looks fantastic. On Android, on most of their Pixels and Nexuses, it looks great. Then they find like a weird LG phone somewhere in the wild, and it's just like, wow, this padding's totally off. We forgot about the extra padding that LG adds to their text views, for example. Whereas Flutter, you won't run into that problem. Any other questions? Where does the name Flutter come from, Faisal? Flutter, the name Flutter. I only say this because I only learned this recently. Google buys a lot of company, as we all know. So one day, Google bought this company called Flutter that does gesture technologies. And then when they were building Sky, they said, we need a name. So really, someone from their legal team opened up, I think, another Google spreadsheet with all their list of names. They scrolled down and they said, huh, Flutter sounds cool. And that's how Flutter came to be. There's no other reason. Absolutely no other reason. So it's because they had that domain name and license and trademark and all that stuff. Google, for whatever reason, wanted to save money on trademark. So despite having billions and billions. So that's where Flutter comes from. And with that, thank you. If you have any other questions, you can always thank you. You can always email me at faisalabid@gmail.com or find me on Twitter. And yeah, thank you.